Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Humanist Perspective. I'm Jim Dugan, your host for this evening. My guests for this evening are David Capasso, an attorney at law and senior and founding partner of Capasso and Associates. He's a graduate of Loyola Law and a member of the First Presbyterian Church of New Orleans, Louisiana Environmental Action Network, Pax Christi, Interfaith Committee for Worker Justice, MMACI, Community of Abraham, A Community Voice, and Local 100 United Labor Unions. And my second guest is Michael Gahagan, owner of the immigration law firm, member of the American Immigration Lawyer Association since 2008, and since 2012 has been very busy representing clients with immigration issues before federal district courts and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Good afternoon.
Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your opportunity to talk about the current situation of immigration in the United States, and especially here in Louisiana and even right down to New Orleans. Where should we begin? I think we've noticed that things have changed a little bit in the year 2017. What's different now than compared to 10 months ago?
What I've noticed is people are being deported at a much faster rate. The immigration courts have hired many new immigration judges. They've opened up many new courts, and they're moving along what some would call a rocket docket, where people are arrested, brought in front of an immigration judge, and deported within a matter of days sometimes before the people actually have the opportunity to learn their rights or even contact an attorney to help represent them. And a lot of times their families, before they have the opportunity to find a knowledgeable immigration attorney to represent them, their loved one has already been ordered deported and he's on a plane back to wherever he came from.
And this is happening right here in Louisiana.
Yeah, right here in Louisiana, especially in Gina, Louisiana. They have.
Where's Gina?
Gina, Louisiana is up near Alexandria. They have a prison there specifically for immigration, and they have 5 immigration judges that come in from out of town, and they move people through the process as fast as possible. It's out in the middle of nowhere. There are no immigration attorneys up in that area, so most of the attorneys that represent clients like me have to travel from New Orleans or from Baton Rouge to get up there to represent them. So it's actually very difficult to find an immigration attorney if they have time to find one at all, because they move so quickly.
And of course, it's very important if one finds oneself in the unfortunate position of being faced with deportation to have proper legal representation.
I mean, if you're in New Orleans, I will say that, and Mike will agree with you, we are part of a sanctuary city. Thanks to Marlon Guzman, our sheriff. Mm-hmm. You may say what you want about him, but he's a friend of mine, and he has made it clear over 6 years ago, I will not detain anybody in my prison who has not committed a crime, and you will have 48 hours to let me know why you want me to detain him. The federal government under Obama, actually, there were people in the Obama administration that were still part of the Bush administration in ICE, the immigration enforcement, and they didn't take too kindly to be told that. So they made other excuses about the jail wasn't proper anyway, so they shifted all their prisoners to St. Tammany, St. Charles. So it definitely is a place where you are not going to just come into New Orleans and just round people up with racial profiling. And our mayor has said the same things. But if you live in the outlying areas, if you live in Southeast Louisiana, it is an open season for anybody that has any issues. If you're not a citizen, this is some misnomer that says since you're here legally or you have a green card under the Trump administration, you could be detained for anything.
Mm-hmm. And this is what you're talking about there, if I understand correctly, is the federal government trying to order local law enforcement to hold people for review of their immigration status and possible deportation. And you're saying that New Orleans tries to identify itself as a sanctuary city to try. So what is that really? This is always fuzzy, I think, in many people's minds, this distinction between federal law, the federal purview for immigration, and then how states and localities fit into that.
Well, I just have a perfect case that I was in court today with a woman who had a DWI, an American citizen, been in this country for 25 years, got her citizenship. She was driving with a Caucasian male in Jefferson Parish, and she was stopped by a police officer. And I'm just going to say it plainly, is that police officer has made up his mind that I'm going to check your immigration status because you're Latino and you have an accent. I don't believe you that you're a citizen. You may have a DWI, and there are issues involving that, and we'll deal with that later in the criminal, which I deal with most of the criminal part of it. But the nerve of him to hold her, say that ICE is coming, and that happens on a daily basis in America, and this is an American citizen. Imagine if that person just got a green card, or that person had a legal visa. Technically, under the Trump administration, and Mike will say this, is that if you get a DWI, or definitely if you get any kind of felony, you can be deported regardless of your immigration status. So this whole issue of legal or illegal, but the sanctuary city is saying if you have no record or you have done nothing wrong, we're not going to stop you. We're not going to ask for your ID. And like the sheriff in Arizona who was lionized by the Trump administration for, I believe, committing civil rights violations and human rights violation by basing it on just like racial profiling with African Americans. It's the same thing.
So that went several different directions at once. So we have the concept of sanctuary cities there, or not just cities, but mostly cities and towns, I guess, that are, I guess you would say, are actually trying to enforce that distinction between federal and local, right? That as a local authority, you're not really part of immigration. You're not.
Well, the Trump administration is trying to make it seem like by saying sanctuary, you're going to protect people that are criminals. And that's their divisiveness, to think that just because somebody is in this country and they're not a citizen, that they're suspect. No, that's not what it means. It just means that we're just going to honor each other. We're going to work together. Take, for example, in Greensboro, North Carolina, a great program set up by churches that said, we don't care who you are, but come to us if you want a library card, if you want us to help you get a driver's license, help us work with you. We don't care where you're from, just come and we'll help feed you. If that's not the most incredible God-fearing way, but we do understand that if you come across the border and you didn't have the right paperwork, the Trump administration calls you a criminal. That's not the way it was in the Obama administration or down back. It was almost a due process where we will give you an opportunity to have a hearing, to prove yourself, to get a lawyer. Now it's guilty first, and that's where you must have legal advice. If you're not a citizen, you must have an immigration lawyer to give you advice because you're in jeopardy.
And it's important to let everybody know that immigrants, whether they're here illegally, legally, or they have the exact same constitutional rights as American citizens, with the exception of the Second Amendment and owning a gun. They have the right to free speech. They have the right to due process, effective assistance of counsel. They have the right to all these things. Once they get arrested by ICE, of course, Immigration Customs Enforcement will tell them they have no rights and they have no rights to an attorney, but it's not true. You have the right to an attorney, although it's not government paid for. You have to hire your own attorney or find pro bono counsel. But it's important for everyone to know if you're on American soil, you have the constitutional rights that every other American has.
And this kind of confuses me a little bit, the process. If immigration is proceeding against someone for rapid deportation, they don't seem necessarily to feel a need to explain to this person that maybe we should slow this down and you should get an attorney.
Well, that's right. And a lot of times, even as an attorney after I'm hired, I have a problem getting a copy of the immigrant's file to give him effective assistance of counsel and procedural due process. So I will ask Immigration Customs Enforcement for a copy of the file, which the statutes, the Immigration Nationality Act, prescribes I must get a copy of the file to represent my clients, and ICE refuses. So then I'm forced to file a Freedom of Information Act request, and I wait the time, and the government refuses then I'm forced to sue them in district court, and then we fight it out for 2 years. Meanwhile, my client is rotting in jail simply trying to get a fair trial. A lot of times they'll say, Michael, I don't want to go through this anymore, just please deport me. I would rather you deport me to get me out of this prison I'm in, back to wherever I came from, instead of waiting for my due process in my day in court where you can have effective assistance of counsel. And it's a shame.
And that's the key, is that they want to make it so unbearable that you will finally do the please just self-deport me, and then you can have this rationale that says, see, they really wanted to leave anyway. But didn't you say there were some judges that now that Trump has appointed that they're not even showing the respect to attorneys, they're not even talking to anybody?
It's gotten more frustrating to be an immigration attorney facing the judges. The Department of Justice just last week announced publicly that they want the immigration judges to have quotas on the number of people they deport every month. That has nothing to do with due process or of where the facts fall on the law. They want, Jeff Sessions wants a certain amount of people deported every month. It's turning due process on its head, where every case is not seen as its own viable case with its own facts applied to the law. It's seen as just a number, get those people out as quickly as possible. And we get a lot of pushback and a lot of, I guess, uncivilized behavior from immigration judges towards the immigration attorneys, where you ask for a bond hearing, and they'll set the bond hearing the very next day, and you don't know about it. The next thing you know, your client's been ordered deported or denied bond, and you get a call from your client, say, yeah, we had a bond hearing this morning at 9 a.m., why weren't you there? It's because nobody told you. So we've had to make some arrangements with some of the courts where if this happens again, there's going to be lawsuits filed, but this is the way some of it happens.
I think this would surprise a lot of Americans to hear some of these details, because under usual procedures or rules of how courts work in criminal matters, you don't play those kinds of dirty tricks, right? You would have, if you didn't get the file that you needed, the case wouldn't be able to proceed.
It wouldn't move forward, that's correct.
And somehow that doesn't work in immigration.
That's correct. It's an administrative hearing. It's not criminal or civil. It's administrative. But the Immigration Nationality Act tells them you must give them a copy of this person's file so you can represent them. There are many cases annually where the person is an American citizen and they get deported because there's proof in the file that he was naturalized when he was a child, but the attorney can't put his hands on it because Immigration and Customs Enforcement refuses to give the file. Even though they know the guy's an American citizen, they deport him anyways. So that happens as well, and that's one of the dangers of playing dirty tricks and refusing to give copies of the file, and where they know there's exculpatory evidence in the file, the immigration attorney cannot get his hands on it, so he's at a huge disadvantage.
Where's the compassion that we had especially in this issue, where we said, wait a minute, are they being persecuted in their own country? Isn't there that redress? That used to be my first case in law school at the Loyola Law Clinic. And I remember Luz Molina and Bill Quigley that taught me well. I had the Haitian Civil War was going on in the middle 90s, and a man said, if you send me back, I'm going to be killed. I was part of the military. And then we went into court, and even in the Clinton administration, even with a judge that was on the bench, there was a lot of nastiness of, are you one of those people that did the atrocities, or are you still covering up? Are you actually one of those people that's been? Do they have to prove that I'm really in danger? And I would argue that the racism is so deep and the demonization has happened with Latinos and the whole Central American issue for the last 30 years that people just don't even have this compassion that they used to. That these people are running from countries where they're afraid they're going to be killed. We see that every day. We know it. There used to be political asylum. There used to be issues that you could, but now it's like we don't care. But on the other hand, and I don't mean to make this joke, but the president's wife and the president's first wife and his third wife, they are part of a movement of millions of Eastern European, Caucasian, white people that seem to have an easier time to get jobs, to get access, get a lawyer, and get legal. And you know the one big thing, and Michael say, get married to an American citizen, bang, and you are an American citizen. Do something good, save somebody's life, join the military, and suddenly an undocumented person who may have had problems with his paperwork suddenly becomes legal. And of course the boss, who the corporations and people who want these low-wage workers to come in, there's ways to extend your visa. And the hypocrisy is so deep that South Carolina, a state that is so Republican, so anti-immigrant, has the largest amount of H-2B visas because you basically say to the government, the corporation says, I can't find workers who will work for a minimum wage $7.25, so I need to hire illegals, or I shouldn't say that word, but people who are undocumented to make them come here for less wage. And don't get me started, but the two exceptions,
Too late.
the two exceptions of the National Labor Relations Act that can pay people less wages are farm workers and servants. And that was a thing in the 30s where rich people did not want their servants to organize a union, and the farm workers and the sharecroppers did not want those workers to organize a union, so they made those workers be able to pay less wages so they can bring in. And there is truth to the fact that when you bring in low-wage workers from other countries, it undercuts American workers. And there is a truth to the fact that we have to have an immigration policy so that we can finally deal with that issue, because it is hurting American workers when you bring in low-wage workers and you don't have a policy, and then you blame the workers that are here. And then one last thing I want to say is that in the 70s, I read this big article in the Times, is that the way it worked was that you came here for the season, you picked the crops, you went back to your family, and you came again. And then sometimes when the Reagan administration clamped down first on immigration, you realized that it was too dangerous to go back and forth, so you stayed and you started to raise your family. So it really was the draconian policies of the anti-immigration fact that forced more people to come here. It used to be that we had seasonal workers in North Carolina, California, and the North with apples, but now our policies have forced them to come, and now everybody just has to just rely on having a good lawyer they can trust and mine through the system until we get this right in Congress.
So I want to try to understand, one of the points you hit on there was the businesses here that want to hire seasonal workers, often farm labor we're talking about. How does that work? I mean, do they have to go through formal visa program, or it sounded like they're asking for exceptions to a lot of the rules?
Well, before we actually had people saying, check the paperwork, I-9 forms. The I-9 form means that you must have the paperwork to prove that you have a Social Security number. But before it was just shacks on the farms, and people were done under the shadows and illegal, and it was just done that way. And the businesses that had the connections were able to avoid any kind of enforcement. And now it's become, I can get an agent to pay $20,000 from Central America to bring somebody up here legally to have a temporary visa, and then we'll figure out what to do to make that temporary visa permanent. It's money and it's connections to. And we talked about Disney World. It's offensive to go to Disney World and see all these people from all these countries. Wow, it's a small world, but they're here with all these H-2B visas, and they got here because Disney doesn't have to pay them a minimum wage, and they get to stay in the place for the summer, and they go back. And Orlando is so expensive you can't even live there. But it's just this hypocrisy of that if you have money and connections, you're legal. But if you come here because somebody said there's a job and you get here on a truck on under the bridge, that somehow you're the criminal. And this is where this whole system is hypocritical and racist.
I think an important distinction here too, because the two of you have very different approaches, or you have different focuses in your interaction with immigration, because you do more criminal, David, and you do more immigration per se. So a lot of people have multiple problems, right? So it's a different situation if somebody is up for deportation and they don't have any criminal issues, no criminal record, but then if they do, they have a whole different set of issues, a different set of problems.
Well, if I have somebody that has any kind of criminal issue, if we can resolve that criminal issue in court and reduce it to a misdemeanor or a small one, that helps the immigration lawyer to be able to proceed and have more. Under the Obama administration, it was clear if you get the felony removed or resolved, that person had a really great chance. And now with Trump, again, you still don't know what's going on. Even if somebody doesn't have a criminal record, they still could be deported. But we just had a case where a person was in this country for 28 years and everything was great. Their father was a citizen, their children were citizens. But when ICE came to investigate somebody else in their family, they ran this person's name and found that he had a theft from 21 years ago from Texas. And they took him, saying that could, under the Trump administration, what is the law, that you could still be deported. There was an unwritten rule, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, that if you had 15 years between your last conviction, that it was a grace period. They weren't going to use that against you. Some compassion, forget it. The Trump administration says, who cares? We just want to get them faster, deport them faster, as he said about the quotas.
On that same vein, we're talking about the Supreme Court had a case called Padilla versus Kentucky a few years ago. And this is important to know. If you're an immigrant and you're on legal status, a green card holder, or here on a valid visa, whatever the situation is, and you get charged with a crime, make sure you contact a knowledgeable criminal defense attorney who understands the consequences that a criminal conviction can wreak havoc on an immigrant. A lot of times, if a criminal defense attorney doesn't understand immigration law, he will plead guilty just to get a couple days in jail or suspended sentence. But unfortunately, as soon as he pleads guilty, it's just marked that guy for deportation. Sometimes it's an aggravated felony where a knowledgeable immigration attorney isn't able to save that guy from deportation. So a lot of times somebody will come to my office who had a criminal defense attorney who did not do a good job. I will say, I don't want to touch your case right now. I'm going to refer you to Dave Capasso. Dave will file a Padilla motion, reopen their case, get that criminal conviction taken care of, and then send them back to me where I can actually apply for the benefits. Say if somebody marries a nice American girl or a nice American boy, and we can apply for a green card that way. But it's important to find a knowledgeable criminal defense attorney that understands how criminal conviction can wreak havoc on your immigration status, but also don't do your own paperwork. If you're doing an immigration case, find a knowledgeable immigration attorney. Do not hire somebody called a notario, which is well known in Central and South America. Do not hire a quote-unquote immigration consultant. Get a licensed attorney who's an expert in immigration law.
And it sounds like maybe one rule for anybody who is not a natural-born U.S. citizen, don't take the plea deal. I mean, because if you plead guilty to something, that's going to be grounds for deportation.
Well, Padilla versus Kentucky made it clear that your attorney and the court now, and I've seen it changed over my course of the court will say, are you American? Are you a citizen or not? And if you're not, that this conviction, if you plead today, it can be used against you for deportation. Do you understand that? And that really makes it clear to people. So if you are not a citizen, and you plead to a disturbing the peace or a small misdemeanor, traffic violations and stuff like that, your attorney should advise you that should not affect your deportation, but you want to make them know that it still is going to be on your record, but there's certain things that can be expunged, or there's certain things called diversion where the case will be dismissed. But yes, before it was the attorney would just say, plead guilty, you'll get probation, it'll be okay, and they never advised them. And so yes, you just want to make sure that you have an immigration lawyer and a criminal defense attorney that knows both ends of the spectrum.
I think in our preparation for this, a very important point came out, which is that it's very important for someone who is an immigrant here to have a good supportive network. And we're all, in one sense or another. But to develop, it's important to develop a support network here of people who are going to notice if you disappear and are going to have some idea of what kind of attorney to call, because that makes a big difference in the outcomes.
I'd agree. If you're an immigrant here, make sure you do your research proactively and find out who is a good immigration attorney, who is a good criminal defense attorney if I have some kind of issue. And also talk to your family, saying if something ever happens, I want you to call this person. I want you to call this immigration attorney. It may be 3 or 4 days before I land in a jail where I can actually pick up the phone and call you, or I may never get to the point where I can make a phone call to call you. So when I do call you, I want you to call this particular immigration attorney and tell him to come get me and defend me, or if I get picked up for something and put in criminal jail, I want you to call this particular criminal defense attorney and have your network of people that can protect you before you need them. Because people will panic and unfortunately they'll go to a notario or some attorney who's never handled an immigration case before, and a criminal defense attorney who doesn't understand pleading could cause havoc in your immigration status, and it really will mess up your situation.
And I hate to sound cynical, but Jeff Landry, our Attorney General, this is right home base. This is our
Jeff Sessions?
Jeff Landry
In Louisiana.
is the Louisiana Attorney General. Jeff Beauregard Sessions, who has his quota, and he really is out to lunch in a lot of ways. But Jeff Landry has been the I'll do what Trump says, and I'm into this because I can gain traction in a red state. I'm thinking about running for governor against John Edwards, and I am going to pick into New Orleans because it's Democrat and pick on them. I say to Mr. Landry, why don't you go over to Kenner, where it's 26% Latino? You know why you don't do that? Because they have done exactly what Mike said. They have communities. They have white and other American citizens that support them. And if you mess with them, there was a story in Illinois and Missouri where a coach, a Latino person who is not a citizen but had a green card, but he had a conviction for a DWI and he had another thing, and they tried to deport him and do that thing. The whole town almost got together with some people in the district attorney's office said, let him out because he's the coach of my kid's team. He works at this restaurant. That guy was out in one day, and that's how you can fight back against this. Basically, it's almost like a Gestapo tactic by saying the sanctuary movement says we're going to protect you. And it can work in churches, in groups that say we're going to vouch for him in court. And I always like to have a lot of people in court to support my client. And it's tough to do that in Genoa, Louisiana, or Oakdale when nobody can get up there, but it makes a difference.
Well, we've covered a lot of material in a very short period of time. In 10 seconds, what should an immigrant know?
Number one, find a good immigration attorney before you need it. That's the most important thing. I own the immigration law firm of New Orleans. If anybody has any questions, they can call me.
Immigration makes America great. And I have that ad in the Jambalaya News, and I tell to everybody is that you better lawyer up if you are not a citizen in this Trump administration. And, Mike is actually modest, but he knows which cases that will win, and he knows what to do when he has a case. And if you have any other legal issues on the side, I can help as well. But we want to be your attorney on anything. And you actually could collect a personal injury settlement regardless of your status. So if you are in a car wreck or it doesn't matter, you actually still have the same rights. So we want to be your attorneys for any issue. You need to know somebody you can trust and you can afford.
Well, Michael Gahagan and David Capasso, thank you so much
Thank you for having me.
Giving us a lot of information we didn't have before about the current situation of immigration here in New Orleans.